Our first order of business here today is to welcome our two newest members of the committee, Senator Rawlings and Senator Reed. Thank you for being here. Congratulations or condolences, however it is, and welcome to the Senate Education Committee. Secondly, we would like to introduce our wonderful staff for the session. We have Josh Collins, Emily Wiley, Lauren Bush, Peter Wright, Yvette Perry, and Landon Holder. I can assure you none of this would be possible without this good group. I would also be remiss if I did not introduce our new co-chair, Senator Tishner. Welcome to the Education Committee. And we're going to get right to it as we're going to bring in KHEAA, the Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship, to present. We're going to try to keep this segment to about a 15-minute segment. Okay, good. Senator Higdon, I believe, has a question.
Mr. Chairman, just real quick, want to welcome Joe Carroll back. Excuse me, it's been a while. Back to the committee room. She's used to being on this side of the action instead of out in front, but welcome back to LRC. It's good to see your smiling face this morning.
Thank you, Senator Higdon. I do appreciate that. I'm Joe Carroll Ellis, Executive Director of the Kentucky Higher Education Assistance Authority.
And I'm Kim Dolan, Vice President of Government Relations, Communications, and Outreach for KHEAA and KHEAA.
I have to put these glasses on or I won't be able to see my notes here I have in front of me, but thank you very much for giving us just a few minutes today. The reason we're here is to give the committee a heads up about some legislation that KHEAA is going to pursue this session regarding the Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship Program. That program was created in 2019 by Senate Bill 98, and Senator Wilson was the primary sponsor of that bill. And the purpose of it is to assist Kentuckians who have not yet earned an associate's degree obtain an industry-recognized certificate, diploma, or an Associate of Applied Science degree in one of Kentucky's high 5 top demand programs. And those programs are determined by the Kentucky Workforce Innovation Board. Now, due to the popularity of the program and the steady growth of the program, Work Ready funds have been depleted each year that we have administered the program. For example, for the 2023-2024 school year, the application was cut off in December of that year because we knew we were going to run out of funds. Work Ready is what's called a last dollar in scholarship. And this means that the funds are awarded toward the remaining tuition and fee balance owed after any federal and state grants and scholarships are awarded. This calculation allows Work Ready to be awarded mainly to middle-income families who do not qualify for need-based funds like the Pell and CAP grants, but whose families also typically cannot afford to pay for college out of pocket. However, there is no income cap limit on Work Ready eligibility, so higher income students are also eligible to receive these funds. So in an effort to be better stewards of limited state financial aid dollars, we are proposing implementing an income cap on Work Ready eligibility so we can extend the funding to assist more middle income students who most need the funds since they do not qualify for other financial assistance. Our proposal is to set that limit at 250% of Kentucky median income. If that cap had been in place for the 23-24 school year, the income amount limit would have been $148,400. The amount dispersed to students with an income over that threshold for 23-24 was $2.22 million. Had the cutoff been in place, KHEAA would have been able to extend the application period at least 3 more months into the spring semester. We arrived at that 250% by looking at the history of work-ready recipients by adjusted gross income and at what level the headcount recipients, number of recipients started dropping off, which is around $150,000 in FY 2024, which equated to around 250% of median income. That mark held constant when we looked back at previous years as well. Representative McCool has agreed to sponsor this bill to implement the income cap, and we hope that it will make it to your committee during this short session. We just wanted to give you a heads up about the information so that you would be ready if the bill came your way, and of course we will be happy to be here and talk about it again. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the presentation. We appreciate you all being proactive. And just as a note, this is information-only meeting today. I'm sure this will be the last information-only meeting of this session. Senator Wilson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Joe Carroll, thank you for your presentation today. And wanted to ask you, for the benefit of our newer members, to talk about how this is funded, because you also take care of lottery funds, for KEYS money, CAP grant, KTG grant, all of that. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yes, Work Ready Scholarship is funded by Kentucky Lottery funding, like our other major financial aid programs, KEYS, CAP, KTG.
And what percentage of the funding actually, I know if we look at the funding, probably KTG grant as well as the CAP grant actually receives a little bit more, which are the need-based grants, than the KEYS. Is that correct?
I believe if you were to rank them, it would be CAP. Do you mean dollar amount or percentage amount? Dollar amount. CAP is our largest program, followed by KEYS. KEYS is still a larger program than KTG, because KTG is limited to students attending our independent institutions. So that's why it's not as large.
Okay. And then following after that would be the Work Ready scholarships?
Yeah. Well, dual credit would come actually before Work Ready.
Okay.
You may recall Work Ready has two parts. Work Ready scholarship, like I'm talking about this morning, but there's also Work Ready dual credit, which is for high school students pursuing dual credit courses in that CTE curriculum. So we have kind of a combo: Work Ready dual credit, regular dual credit. That's larger than Work Ready. We dispersed around $13 million in the last two academic years for the regular Work Ready.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Senator Higdon has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Carroll, again, thank you for being here today. And my question is, I'm asking you to spend more money instead of saving money, but I'm on the KHEAA board, and I was excited when KHEAA voted to add education as one of the five high demand sectors. And we do know that that's a high demand, especially for teachers. And of the five high demand pathways, education is the only one that requires a bachelor's degree. The only one. Rest of them are associate's degree. And what I'd like to see is that we have enough support these students that decide to go in the education pathway to allow them to get an associate's degree when they graduate from high school. Make sure they have an associate's degree before they go on to the and finish up and get their other degrees, bachelor's degree. So I'd like to see us talk about that, because I think it's very important that we do that. Like I said, since that's the only pathway that requires a bachelor's degree.
Right, and if I may ask you a question, Senator Higdon, are you referring to there being a certain, I guess, associate's program of study that is a pathway into a bachelor's of ed, or? I guess
mainly I'm talking about the apprenticeships that they've started. I know Nelson County has one that's up and running, and I think that's kind of the pathway they want to go, where they get associate's degree before they graduate from high school.
Gotcha.
And then when they
Yeah.
go to, and that's in cooperation with Western Kentucky University. So I think that's a model not just for Kentucky, but for the country that what they're doing. So I think we're going to see more and more schools participate in that, and other universities also.
Right. Our staff is, currently trying to wrap our heads around what the changes in the top 5 mean, and particularly on the education one, because, like you said, the bachelor's degree is required for education. So that's certainly on our radar as well. But if I can just put in another little plug, I think that this income cap better positions our program for expansion into the future for other programs that might be added. So it would be another good reason to consider our proposal.
And we need to do it as soon as possible. And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, to take up, but it sounds like maybe a good amendment for Representative McCool's bills. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take a point of privilege right now before we get to Senator Wise, but along those lines, Senator, what you're talking about with WKU and CPE, they have this program set up to, I think they're attempting also to pull down federal funds from that also. So if there's ever a way we could leverage KHEAA funds to pull down more federal funds, that would be good. Next question, Senator Wise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Carroll, it's always good to see you. Thanks for the work you do. I'm going to follow up on Senator Wilson. Are we at the time that we need to look at the KEYS formula, ACT and GPA? I think many of us here have gotten children that are in the system, have graduated. We definitely have constituents. But I didn't know right now if this is a session and where you may be on this. I hate to put you on the spot, but since this is discussion only, it's a good time, Mr. Chairman, to have this. Are we at the point of maybe reevaluating where we are with awarding students for that scholarship money based on GPA and ACT in today's time? And I don't know the last time that formula, is that what it was established at?
Yes.
And that was in
1997. I think 7 was a legislation, and 98 was the first year. If I think we're in the ballpark there.
So
yes.
Just showing my age, I was
Mine
just
too.
graduated college that year. But I would like to know: have you all had discussions about that since we're at this point of maybe what's your opinion, and if there was anything that we need to have as the legislative body to look more into that to make
Okay.
it challenging in terms of making sure we're worth what we're getting with the scholarship that's there.
Okay. As you are aware, first of all, KEYS awards have not been increased since the program was created. So initially, the program, would have paid for that associate's degree, Senator Higdon, if a student had the maximum KEYS amount. While tuition has increased, obviously, over time, the KEYS amount has not. So the buying power, if you will, of KEYS has certainly declined over time. As far as how to base the awards, there have been various proposals, made by different legislators. Since we're just having a conversation, there has been proposals made to cut off some of the lower GPA range on KEYS awards. If you're going to ask me, I'm going to tell you I don't think that's a good idea. We view KEYS as an access and encouragement to encourage students to pursue higher education. Once they complete their 8th grade year, they start receiving communications about us, about their KEYS each year and what they've earned. We don't think it's a good message to tell students that, oh, well, you didn't get a 3, you're not college material. And of course, KEYS can be used in most any post-secondary situation. It doesn't have to be towards a 4-year degree. And we get to have that constant communication with the students. So I'm not a fan. Also, when you look at the numbers, lopping off those GPAs really does not save hardly any money because they're the lower end amounts anyway. So that's my 2 cents, and I'll put it out there in the universe. As far as another way,
Before you go, could you comment? And maybe I missed this, but when you eliminate the low end, and those isn't KHEAA sometimes used for first dollar? So even though it's a small amount, doesn't that allow them to pull down maybe some other money from? Does that ever happen? Am I wrong on that? Because I know we had a bill that was restricting. Senator Thayer had a bill that was restricting that a few years ago. So
right. I'm not sure I follow what you're asking. I mean, if a student, when student gets their keys, let's say they have a financial aid package, if any student, whether they have keys or not, would get their need-based aid applied first. And then keys would come in there. Very rarely.
Some of the university people told me it was like a Pell question. There's something to do with Pell.
Yeah. So, but very rarely do we get a return of keys funds because a student has been over awarded. It's high enough up in the order. It's not a last dollar in like Work Ready is.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. So Senator Wise, as far as another way to award those funds, we really have not gotten too far down that road, but certainly be happy to think about different ways that could be done.
Just a comment. Thank you for your transparency. Thank you for the discussion.
Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to say two things, and let me say what came to my mind first. I agree with you, Joe Carroll, that I think we need to be able to do more with our Work Ready program. But I recall recently, and I want to go back to Senator Higgins' point. I recall recently that NPR came out with a report. This was back around October, it was in the middle of the election season. And they reported that their studies show that for a family just to meet the basic necessities, the average family meet the basic necessities to have a decent quality of life in America, they had to earn $97,000. And that seemed about right to me. That really when you take into account all the inflationary costs that we've seen with food, housing, et cetera, and you have 2 children, $97,000 is probably what you need not to struggle. When you add on top of that, it seems to me, college education, and I've been through that with 3 children, $148,000 just intuitively seems kind of low to me. I think that that I would not be opposed to seeing that expanded to $175,000, even $200,000, because college is expensive. I mean, when I got through with my children paying for their college, I felt like I got a big raise not doing that. And to Senator Higdon's point, which Senator Higdon, I'm intrigued. I want to have further conversation with you. I think that we need to look at ways in which we can spend more money with regard to Work Ready Scholarship. Obviously, I'm not opposed to looking into the state budget and looking at ways that we can pump more money into education. I think that's what this state really wants, is to see more money pumped into education. So, Senator Higdon, I want to tell you, I like your idea. I want to have more conversation with you about that. I think we ought to, there's certain sectors that we want to have. Technology, engineering immediately come to mind. Education should come to mind, but there may be others, in the next 3 or 5 years that we want to look at expanding. So I'm not willing, obviously I would support Representative McCool's bill. I think Representative McCool is a fine legislator. But if there are ways that we can provide more money into the Work Ready Scholarship, provide more opportunities for families to do it, I'm all for that.
Thank you, Senator Thomas. And I'll just comment that is the threshold. We've struggled, with where do we set that and excuse me, trying to find a sweet spot. And it was really just looking at utilization numbers and what would we save on this side if we cut off at this mark. We're certainly open to conversations about that 250%, and if that needs to come up some, maybe not to the point to where it negates the benefits of doing it, but we even have some families I know that made over $350,000 and they were getting Work Ready money. So we think something needs to be in place so that the dollars go to the people that most need them. Thank you.
Senator Neal, this will be the last question in this segment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I think the question fundamentally that I had in mind has been asked, because judging from what you've said here, I don't see a downside in terms of what we're trying to do with those scholarships. And the whole idea is to lift those individuals, not only to incentivize them, but to support them, to enable them to take the next step. So I agree. I'd like the idea that's been put on the table. It sounds like we need more if we're talking about uplifting students and giving them the opportunity to benefit from this process. So I commend you on the work, and thank you for bringing this information to the table.
Thank you.
That concludes this segment. Thank you so much for your great presentation. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you all for your time.
Next up on the agenda, we have the Office of Education Accountability. This presentation will deal with student achievement, lessons learned from Kentucky's relatively highest and lowest performing schools. This was a request made by me as chair for OEA to present. This report was presented in the EARS committee a little while ago, maybe last month or so. And as we go into session, I'm sure there will be bills and there will be work done on accountability. And this is one of the better reports that I've seen put together by our staff. We have great staff at OEA, did an excellent job. And as I know, everyone reads all reports that flow through their email. I didn't know if it would make it out of your email, and so I want to make sure that they gave everyone on the committee a 30-minute overview of what we heard in that report, and I think this will be helpful as we move into session. You know the deal. State your name for the record. Please proceed.
I'm Chris Riley, Research Analyst, OEA.
I'm Deborah Nelson, Division Manager for Research at OEA, and I just want to let you know that we're going to skip over a few of these slides since the meeting time was changed, just to leave time for some of your questions, but we're happy to address any of the skip slides after the meeting.
If you haven't already done so, you may have already done so. Could you make sure each member receives an email copy of your full report?
Sure.
Is it in our file?
It's on the committee website.
It's on the committee website. So every member, this is just a snapshot of some of the material in their overall report. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Good morning. This study highlights lessons from Kentucky's relatively highest and lowest performing schools relative to improving educational outcomes for students across all backgrounds across the Commonwealth. This study was part of OEA's 2024 study agenda as requested by EARS and was presented to and approved by the committee in November of 2024. The final published report will be available shortly. The study asks, what are the characteristics of the highest impact schools? These are schools in which students perform far above similar students across the state. What barriers exist to improving student achievement in the lowest impact schools? These are the schools in which students perform far below similar students across the state. And how might existing policies and programs address those barriers? The study finds that the highest impact schools exhibit best practices that are well established in education research and for which guidance and support are available through the Kentucky Department of Education and through other sources. In other words, the study found no surprises in this area. Key challenges to implementing these best practices in lowest impact schools were related to leadership and staffing and percentages of new teachers. In its recommendations, the report notes greater potential for monitoring and support of schools for which data indicates challenges. But some of the challenges noted in the report will be difficult to address through local action alone. The presentation will follow this outline, and I'll begin by reviewing data and methods. Almost all the data in the report comes from the school years 2022 and 2023. Staff group schools into 5 impact performance categories ranging from highest to lowest. This study focuses primarily on what can be learned from the highest group to assist schools in the lowest group. Highest impact schools are those in which student performance on state tests far exceeded similar students across the state. Lowest impact schools are those with student performance that is far below similar students across the state. Both the highest and lowest impact categories contain a full range of schools from the lowest to highest poverty. As the report shows, this is not the case when schools are ranked by unadjusted test scores. As schools are normally ranked, almost none of the highest performing schools, but most of the lowest performing schools, have very high student poverty rates. However, the statistical adjustments made in the impact analysis rarely result in schools moving up or down by more than one category. Almost all of the highest impact schools are well above average, as schools are normally ranked, and almost all the lowest impact schools are well below average, as schools are normally ranked. Almost all of these schools were also well above average when compared to all students in the state. Most of the schools in the lowest impact category were below average. We're going to skip over the methods and the data slides, but I did want to emphasize on the data slide that we did visit 14 schools across the Commonwealth as part of our data collection. We'll look now at the differences in spending and staffing between highest and lowest impact schools. First, the difference between highest and lowest impact schools was not explained by how much they spent. Overall, OEA found little difference in per pupil spending between highest and lowest impact schools. There were some small differences, however, on how the funds were spent, with highest impact schools spending proportionally more on expenses related directly to classroom instruction. These higher expenditures are explained largely by the fact that higher impact schools generally have more experienced teachers, and as you'll see on the next slide, lower staff turnover, and at the middle and high school levels, more instructional staff per students. Highest impact schools on average spent slightly less than lowest impact schools on instructional support and school administration. This slide shows the teacher turnover percentages and the average principal tenure for all highest and lowest impact schools. It shows that the highest impact schools have less teacher turnover and more experienced principals relative to the lowest impact schools. Teacher turnover in lowest impact schools was an average of 21%, which is 1.4 times higher than the average turnover of 15% in highest impact schools. Related to turnover, data included at the end of your slide packet show higher percentages of newer teachers in lowest impact schools. We know from previous reports that these newer teachers are increasingly entering teaching through alternative certification routes and may have little or no classroom experience when they begin. Principal turnover is also greater in lowest impact schools. Principals in highest impact schools stay an average of 6 years, which is 1.5 times greater than the average of 4 years in lowest impact schools. As you will see in the subsequent slides, the constant churn of teachers and principals in many lowest impact schools presents a barrier to establishing the systems necessary for student academic success. As the report notes, some factors affecting teacher turnover are outside of a school's control. These include the proximity of schools with much more competitive salaries, higher performing student populations, and affordable housing. Administrators in three lowest impact schools noted the lack of affordable housing available in their counties. One had recently experienced a natural disaster, and two were located in rural counties in which most of the properties for sale were expensive family farms. As Deb will explain in the next section, however, teacher turnover can also be influenced by the actions of local leaders to create favorable working conditions.
Thank you, Chris. We'll take a closer look now at the internal characteristics of highest and lowest impact schools. Throughout this section, you'll hear the strong influence of school leaders, especially principals. While this presentation will focus on school-level leadership, please note that the full report discusses leadership roles of district staff in 3 districts we visited in which all of the schools were higher impact schools. Leaders in these districts provided accountability and support across the system of school in the districts, similar to the way strong school leaders provide accountability and support across a system of classrooms. Highest impact site visit schools exhibited all of the characteristics of instructional systems shown on this slide. These systems aligned curriculum and assessment, data analysis and remediation, and instructional monitoring and support. The elements of these systems are supported by decades of education research, and most are outlined in a variety of KDE documents. In other words, it's not a secret that instructional systems are important, and schools and districts can reach out for relevant assistance if needed. Under strong leadership, instructional systems reduce isolation, increase consistency, and promote a sense of common accountability for student success, as illustrated by the following quote. "It's like night and day now from 17 years ago. It's more like our kids for all students than just the ones in your classroom. It used to be that a teacher may only care about the students in the grade they teach. Now there are core check-ins based upon how well the teachers know the children, and the level of instruction has increased." This quote alludes to the teacher leadership teams we found in all highest impact schools. And I should say this is true not only of the schools we visited this year, but the many schools we visited over the years that are higher performing. Teacher leaders, whether formal or informal, played critical roles in their own content areas. Together with principals and other school administrators, they helped to clarify instructional expectations, monitor learning and student work, and mentor new teachers. As one teacher in a highest impact school noted, "You have to have the horses to pull the buggy. The newer teachers are not necessarily good at the beginning, but older teachers pull them along." The instructional systems relied ultimately, however, on principals to ensure that standards for classroom instruction were set and to require action from teachers who are not meeting those standards. Given the well-established importance of instructional systems, OEA was surprised to find that these systems had recently been incomplete or non-existent in most lowest impact schools we visited. As one recently arrived administrator noted, "When I first got to the school, there was extreme autonomy among teachers. We needed to put basic organizational structures in place." OEA visited several schools that had only recently begun to implement these systems after being identified for intervention and receiving assistance from a KDE team. Even with some system elements in place, however, OEA observed inconsistent accountability for classroom instruction in most lowest impact schools. Principals in these schools express resignation about teachers in the school who were unwilling to change practices. In some cases, principals may have lacked the skill or confidence to have difficult conversations and address performance issues. In other cases, principals may lack the will. OEA heard several anecdotes of administrators who did not address performance issues due to personal relationships. In contrast, ineffective classroom instruction was urgently and definitively addressed by principals in highest impact schools and often by the teacher leaders themselves. Finally, struggling teachers in lowest impact schools often lacked support in their subject areas. Some schools lacked the experienced teacher or instructional leaders, and others appeared overwhelmed by the high number of new teachers needing support. And as Chris said, many of our new teachers are entering through alternative routes and may have little or no classroom experience when they enter the classroom. Absent this type of subject-specific report, other components of the system may not impact student learning. For example, in most of the lowest impact schools we visited, districts had recently purchased rigorous curriculum, but in 5 of the 6 of the schools we observed newer teachers and sometimes teachers out of field really struggling to implement those curricula and make the rigorous curricula accessible to students, many of whom were below grade level. So because they were struggling, they simply reduced the standards. And we saw the opposite in the highest impact schools. Teachers thought they couldn't do it, but then those teacher leaders really pulled them up and showed them how to do it. We'll move now to look at climate, culture, and student behavior. The report suggests that effective behavioral systems are a critical building block of school culture and that instructional reforms may be unsuccessful in their absence. The next series of slides show that statewide, highest and lowest impact schools differed more on indicators of climate, culture, and behavior than on any other indicator of school practice available for this study. Data shown are based on teacher responses to a KDE working conditions survey, which is administered every 2 years. And teacher responses in highest impact schools were more favorable in all topic areas, but as you'll see on the next 2 slides, differences were really greatest on questions related to climate, culture, and student behavior, even though the survey does contain questions that are more directly related to teaching itself. These questions that distinguish the highest and lowest impact schools the most address supportive interactions among students, how often student misconduct disrupts learning, and student enthusiasm about being at school. And before leaving this slide, I'll note that even in the highest impact schools, only 50% of teachers responded favorably to the question about student misconduct, which suggests that this is a challenge at least some of the time, even in the highest impact schools. Similarly, these questions address students helping each other, respectful relationships between teachers and students, and effectiveness of school leaders at developing rules. And I'll note again that the survey contains many questions related to leadership, some of which are really directly related to instruction, but this question about leaders' ability to really establish those effective rules was the one that separated the schools, which were really measured on academic achievement the most. Site visit data provide insights into the differences in behavioral systems of high and lowest impact schools. Principals and teachers in all highest impact schools stress the school's strong emphasis on building positive relationships among students and teachers. They also noted heavy investments in time and resources to establish and reinforce behavior expectations. These are principles of the PBIS system, which is recommended by KDE and for which the department provides training. And the system was referenced in most highest and lowest impact schools, but was really implemented differently in the schools. Even with the positive supports and consistent expectations, behavior challenges did remain with individual students in both the highest and lowest impact schools. And in the highest impact schools, principals really addressed these challenges. This sometimes required the principals to be willing to face conflicts with parents, district administrators, and even the local school board. In contrast, teachers in most lowest impact schools reported consistent and troubling behavior challenges. They noted that a small percentage of students can destabilize a school or classroom, that there is often little or no consequence for serious disruptive behavior of some students. And in one school, teachers reported low morale, teacher absences, and substitutes refusing to work in the building. These behavior challenges were really clearly evident in the teacher survey data. And what I want to emphasize here is that neither the school administrators nor the building administrators seemed aware when we asked them about challenges in the school how much these behavior challenges were affecting their efforts to improve the school academically. Challenges associated with limitations on classroom removal for special education students was mentioned in a number of interviews. This is a complicated issue that was beyond the scope of this report, but OEA will be reviewing relevant data and practice related to this question in our upcoming report on student discipline data. As illustrated in the previous slides, strong leadership is necessary to implement effective instructional and behavioral systems. And in its absence, resources invested in schools may not result in desired improvements. Leadership training provided by KDE through the National Institute of School Leadership addresses many of the characteristics shown on this slide and was mentioned as valuable by administrators in both highest and lowest impact schools. However, all school and district administrators interviewed for this study, every single one, mentioned personal on-site mentoring as the most influential source of support in their leadership development. In particular, administrators valued relationships with working colleagues who were familiar with the challenges facing their school levels or populations, someone who could really walk in their shoes. This type of mentoring may be especially important in assisting leaders in addressing issues that require difficult conversations and political will, such as those that are highlighted here. Effective leadership is also critical for teacher recruitment and retention. Highest impact site visit schools were desired destinations for job seekers, and teachers in many of these schools reported reluctance ever to leave the school, even for a higher salary. This quote from a teacher in a highest impact school illustrates this point. The principal is someone that we would follow into the fire. We would fight bears for her. We love her. She's right there with us. She supports us in everything we do. All my life, I've been looking for this place. This is the place I wouldn't have fallen through the cracks as a student, and this was a very high poverty school. I'm so glad I'm here. The principal knows what each student may do and how to keep them on the right track. She knows about their lives. It's like we are part of something here. We'll conclude with a discussion of how the report's findings may be relevant to existing school improvement practices in the Commonwealth. As noted earlier, however, some of the barriers mentioned in the report are not addressed by these policies, and in particular the acute teacher shortages in particular subject areas, which may be outside of the control of local leaders. The report concludes that best practices are well established, but implementation can be challenging and take many years of sustained attention and stable staffing. In some cases, local leaders appear unaware of urgent issues that exist in their schools, but most often lowest impact schools, struggle from leadership challenges, poor climate culture or student behavior, and teacher or principal turnover. The report discusses relevance of the findings to comprehensive school and district plans, CSIPs and CDIPs, use of data from the KDE Teacher Working Condition Survey, and assistance options available to CSI schools, which are the state's lowest performing schools by level. We'll begin with CSIPs and CDIPs. These annually required plans are the primary mechanism by which KDE might support improvement efforts in lowest performing schools. Otherwise, the only assistance and intervention really come from federal requirements. They have the potential to identify schools or districts that are struggling in certain behaviors. That may be behavior, it may be turnover, and connect them with relevant resources. The report notes that there is currently no direct comprehensive statutory guidance for these plans. The report also notes limitations of these plans to impact barriers identified in the report. First, the plans have a real high volume of required elements, but require little or no direct focus on the challenges we have discussed. For example, OEA visited one district in which turnover had more than doubled in recent years and in which over 1/3 of teachers left in a single year, yet no data or planning were evident in the district plan. In some districts, teacher turnover may not be receiving the sustained attention from principals, district staff, or school boards that is needed. As the report notes, the teacher exit survey data collection that was required by House Bill 319 of 2023 was limited, and over 1/3 of districts collected no responses. We know that most schools receive little or no feedback on their plans, and site visit data and other sources in the report acknowledge little impact of the plans on school and district practices. KDE notes reduced staffing in recent years available for this purpose. Finally, plans are perceived by educators as important in theory, but lengthy, burdensome, and inconveniently timed, and some have also reported difficulties with the software. OEA believes attention to CSIPs and CDIPs is merited. It recommends first that the department consider soliciting feedback from educators about CSIPs and CDIPs, including whether submissions are necessary annually for all schools and all elements, and what type of feedback would be helpful. KDE has communicated to OEA that revision of the plans would require statutory changes. Therefore, OEA recommends that KDE submit to the General Assembly its recommendations, if any, on statutory changes or additional legislation that would allow for the department to carry out meaningful review, feedback, and monitoring of CSIPs and CDIPs. Finally, the General Assembly may wish to consider legislation providing direction for CSIPs and CDIPs. Legislation might consider whether there are any conditions under which the department might require districts to take specific actions. And that last piece speaks to the fact that regardless of any serious issues indicated in data, local boards and district staff have the ultimate authority to determine whether and if local action will be taken. Related to the working conditions survey, the report notes that unfavorable working conditions are a potential red flag for school conditions that undermine instruction and achievement. And in here, I'll just mention one anecdote. We interviewed a teacher in a highest impact school who had been a new teacher in another school, and he was ready to quit teaching. He was convinced he had no skills, he couldn't manage classrooms, he felt the principal blamed him, and he was ready to go get another job. He just happened to hear about a job in this highest impact school. He had been working there 3 months when we interviewed him and said he was going to stay in the school the rest of his life. He happened to mention the school that he left, so we looked back at the teacher working conditions survey data, and you can really tell that there were some leadership issues in that school in many of the responses of the teachers, and yet the leader had been in place for many years. So when that starts to happen and teachers start to leave the school, it can take many years to build back the instructional program. As I said, some local leaders appear unaware of the urgent need indicated by some of the data. Teacher working conditions are not typically included in school or district planning documents, and currently KDE does not take an active role in supporting data use. Relevant resources exist in the state, such as the training provided through NISL or the PBIS program I mentioned earlier. OAA recommends, in connection with data release from the survey, KDE should consider providing a list of resources and supports for schools seeking to understand and improve specific challenges indicated in the data. Finally, the report touches on issues associated with CSI schools, which are the lowest 5% of schools by level. By federal requirements, KDE must identify these schools and provide districts with vendor options to assist with improvements. The department can distribute substantial funding, up to $19 million a year, federal funding, to support interventions. The report notes that challenges related to teacher working conditions and turnover are greater in CSI schools than in the lowest impact schools overall. These issues are not typically addressed. And if they're not addressed, the other improvement efforts might not be sustainable. OEA recommends, therefore, that the list of vendor options available for CSI schools include vendors, in addition to KDE, with experience assisting districts to support schools with sustained challenges related to staff turnover, school climate and culture, and student behavior. This concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to take any questions about the material we presented or any of the material in the report.
Thank you so much. I'm sure all the members of the committee see how good of a report this was and how much work you put into it. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's much more that you can see in the report. I've got a quick comment, and then we'll get into some questions. We got about 10 minutes. We got about 5 minutes for questions. There seems to be, a lot of this is stuff we already know in the report, but there does seem to be a key theme there that dovetails with something we found at an SREB conference. I believe Senator Wilson was with me at the same conference. And they did a teacher survey and keys to success and things that were holding them back. And I thought it would be teacher pay, discipline, working conditions. But the number one thing the teachers stated was leadership in the building. That was the key to success or lack of success. And so that kind of dovetails with what you have in your presentation. First up, we've got about 5 minutes for questions. We have a hard stop because we have sexual harassment training. So I'm just going to do 5 minutes. So if you could please keep your questions tight. Senator Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wow. First of all, thank you for the report, because it confirms a lot of things that we already know. But it also focuses on that we got to revisit this in a very complex and comprehensive way. There's many levels to this. But a couple of things really popped out at me. And one, well, you confirmed the piece about leadership. We know that. Leadership in the building is absolutely key. But there's a whole lot else that goes with that. And I'm looking at this piece from what I understand, and that is our emphasis, our lack of emphasis on funding sufficiently professional development. I know at some points we used to invest a lot in professional development. If my observation is correct, it seems we're not doing that as of now. And I think that's one of the areas. I'm just curious as to whether or not you see in your investigation any relationship between the lack of or need for more in the area of professional development.
We did ask about professional development, and actually the number one thing that we heard from that, I'll just throw out here, is people are really not wanting to do the bloodborne pathogen training every year. We didn't know what to do about it in the report, but in terms of the style of professional development, what we found most is that there's just a really consistency in the highest impact schools in the professional development that they do receive really being connected back down to the classroom. And so the district administrators, the school administrators that go to those professional developments, it's really connected to what they're trying to do in the school, and they take it back to the school and really implement it. So that's what we noticed most. It was only really one, if that's what you're asking, it was really one question on our protocol, and it didn't pull out those differences as much. What we really found in terms of the professional training was what was happening in the building with what had come back and the wisdom that had been accumulated by the teachers. And they were really the ones that were, pulling up the other teachers. And then, district administrators who had skills when teachers were struggling in some of those highest impact districts, and maybe there wasn't a teacher leader in the building going in and providing that training. So I'm sure there's a lot more to that, Senator Neal. That just wasn't one of the things that popped out in our protocol as a real difference in terms of the style of professional development. It was really like the way it was incorporated into what they were doing in the building and into the classroom, and the accountability, that group accountability for what the expectations were.
Mr. Chairman, a quick question.
Quickly.
Time is short. Let me just make a quick observation, too. And that is that you made the observation that teachers were leaving. You're getting younger teachers in, some of them coming in very complex situations, and obviously leadership and how people interact in the professional structure is going to be important. But it seems to me that they can't do that all, and there has to be a foundation for that and some mechanism for introducing that information and the changes and the best practices as they go forward. So I just want to make the observation. It seems like professional development has got to be key to this process and should be more investigated. And just want to make one other observation, Mr. Chairman, that is, my understanding that about 15 years ago, we had a program on principal internship, a leadership program. I think we stopped at about 15 years ago. And this program was very important. I think that's been eliminated. Do you see, if you recall any of that, do you see any value in that in this particular, where we are now in terms of moving forward?
We didn't specifically ask about, I think it's the KPIP.
Yes.
Definitely principals, and especially the principals who are struggling, expressed a desire for sort of in-house support that was relevant to what they were doing. And I from what we heard, sometimes KPIP did that and sometimes it did not. So there was definitely a need for support in terms of the exact kind of support that was provided through the KPIP program itself. We didn't hear consistent messages about that, but definitely the need for support, the need for working colleagues. Some of the principals really complained about they were getting, maybe they had a mentor who would call them on the phone, who was a retired principal of 10 years, who maybe taught at a different level and wasn't, we had one principal saying, I'm sitting up here in these trainings, it's not relevant to what I'm doing, and I'm getting texts about students vaping in the school. I want someone to help me with my problems. And so that was the strongest message. And I don't know the degree to which the KPIP program itself matched those exact needs or not. But certainly a need for direct support was mentioned quite frequently.
Well, my focus was not just the KPIP program, but the fact that there needed more development in that area. And I think you confirmed that by your response.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rawlings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In an interim education committee meeting, we heard from KDE, and they showed some charts of increases in proficiency rates up until 2015, and then at 2015 time range, they started declining badly. Someone came up with feedback later to us that that's when Chromebooks were introduced. So have you done an investigation of the use of Chromebooks? And I've heard from teachers that say they spend so much time with testing and surveying kids and doing paperwork. Have you looked at the loss of instructional hours, like the direct instructional hours between teachers and students?
The report does contain data on instructional hours, but that is just what was in the school calendar. And we did show that on average, the highest impact schools were in districts that had probably almost two-thirds or of a week more of instructional hours, maximum instructional hours actually on their calendar. What we did in terms of loss of instructional time, the big things that we heard, student engagement, student discipline, and then when we did hear issues with Chromebooks, it was more with keeping them repaired and going that and we were actually in a classroom where there was a lesson planned and then there was a malfunction with the Chromebooks. So yeah, what we didn't hear complaints about Chromebooks themselves, but about the technology being updated and there being someone in the school to kind of keep things going, because that can be really disruptive when they're planning a lesson a certain way and it doesn't happen. But we didn't ask specifically about that. So
okay, thank you. I just hope there's more of a look at Chromebooks and how that's affecting student outcomes. So I appreciate it.
Senator Givens.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I know our time is brief, so I'll cut my questions down to really just one question. But I want to start with a compliment for Dr. Nelson and Mr. Riley. Thank you for the presentation. Very well done. Mr. Chairman, thanks for making this a research topic for OEA and the folks here that are so skilled in doing what they do. My question is a simple one. Is there anyone from KDE in the room representing KDE? Would you, pardon? Okay. It would be my hope that when we're in session and we have an education committee meeting that someone representing the commissioner or the commissioner himself is in the room to respond to conversation. So please carry that message back that we need KDE in the space for purposes of these conversations. I would appreciate a follow-up from him or someone representing him. Thank you.
Senator Higdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. What is OEA's responsibility when you find you found this principal that was underperforming and then that was causes some problems in the school? What do you do? What's your responsibility when you find that?
So OEA has two divisions. We have an investigations division and we have a research division. And I don't know, Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, we don't share any information with the investigator side or follow up when we see sort of ineffective practice and that type of thing. And the reason we don't do that is, and you can probably hear from the comments, people really tell us a lot when we go on site visits. You know, from the superintendent on down, we get a lot of important information. And when people shared that information, we turned around and got the school in trouble, we would no longer get the information. So we don't reveal the site visits, and unless something was really illegal, which has never happened. So we see sort of ineffective practice, but we don't. We sort of have a firewall between what we do and anything that would happen outside of the office, because it allows us to collect really valuable information. If we ever saw anything that was actually illegal, I would talk to my boss, but mostly what we see is practice that is not ideal.
Okay, but I understand confidentiality and not sharing what the teachers share with you, but when you go back and you look at your report and you find that it's obvious that what's going on, I would think that could be shared. Thank you.
Senator Thomas, you'll have the final word. If you could keep it, we're already over. If you could keep it to about a minute or so, I'd appreciate it.
I promise you I'll do that, Mr. Chair. Mr. Riley and Dr. Nelson, I'm like Senator Givens, I really enjoyed your presentation today. Dr. Nelson, my question is to you. And I will begin by saying I am not a negative person. That is not my personality. But this question is going to sound very cynical. Your talk today focused on three words: climate, culture, and behavior. That was your theme of your report. And so my question to you is simply this. If you got a school that's in a high poverty area, you got a school where the parents are not interested in education attainment, and you got a school where the parents are not interested in disciplining your children, okay, aren't we talking about something that's outside the control of the schools? I mean, is there anything we can do if a school has children that come in that kind of environment?
Because of what you said, the challenges in highest poverty schools, that's the reason that we use the method that we use. Because when you rank schools as you normally do, because of the challenges associated with poverty, you're not going to see those schools that are really doing maybe an excellent job. There are some schools where there are even additional challenges over what you said. Maybe schools where the students are moving constantly, and it's really, really tough. However, we have visited many highest poverty schools, including for this report, where the students walk in the building and you would not know that they're when you observe in the school. And it's really the result of superhuman, I would say, efforts of district leaders, and keeping those systems going to where when the students walk in the building, it's a safe place for them. It's a place where they feel respected. And so we visited some of those schools that you describe, and I will say there are superhuman efforts. The one school, they really focus a lot on relationships, consistency, making it an environment that feels safe and respectful for the students. And sometimes they just go way beyond the call. One principal had the students had her cell phone, and when the family was thrown out of their house or something happened at midnight, she'd be there. And that's not a reasonable expectation. But when those students walked in the building, they were on point. We were in that building. They were right next to a middle school where the behavior, it was same community, same families. And the middle school was really out of control. The principal left in the middle of the year. Within 2 weeks, those students came into the building, that I'm talking about. They're not only with the program, they're telling a new student who comes in, this is what happens. And I don't know if it's a reasonable expectation that leaders have the qualities of some of but I will say, when you said the three words that I focus on, I would add leadership. That when you have these really skilled leadership, leaders, they can get teachers on board. They can really change everything in a building. So yes, we have visited many high poverty schools in most of your all's districts over the years where you would not know what environment the children were in before they came into the school.
Thank you so much. That'll have to be the final word. We really appreciate the presentation. Excellent work. That concludes our meeting today. Just as one final announcement, going into session, our new start time will be at 10:30. Meeting at 10:30 on Thursdays. We'll be in this committee from 10:30 to 11:30. This meeting's adjourned.